Alright everybody, so this is what your software is going to look like when you open up Silhouette Studio. Right now it's set to the defaults, which is the Cameo machine that I'm using today, the Cameo 4. And then our feed type is manual. Over here you can see we're going to leave that the same. Our cutting mat is the Auto Cameo cutting mat, which I'm also going to be using today. And then right now our media size is 12 by 12. But since our piece of multimedia paper that we're going to be using is 5 by 7, we are not going to keep this at 12 by 12. If our stencil, or if our total project is going to be 5 by 7, I actually like to have a little bit of a border, at least a ½ inch around it. So because of that, I'm going to make my width 4.5. And then I'm going to make my height 6.5. And that will make it so I can easily center my stencil in the middle of my page, as well as just have a really nice border around everything. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into our library and grab the design that we're going to be using. And the library is up here in the upper right hand corner. You have a couple different tabs that are very important in Silhouette Studio, and I'm going to go ahead and click the one that says library. And when I pull it up, this is what it's going to look like. So you can see I have over 1,500 designs, so it can take a lot of patience to scroll through and try and find the itty bitty tiny design that we're looking for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to the search bar, and just like you can find designs in the Silhouette Design Store, you can search your designs by keywords also, the designs that are in your library. So I'm going to go ahead and search love. Because this is the design that I'm going to be using today. So I'm going to go ahead and double click this design to open it up in Silhouette Studio. And as you can see, it comes in at its default size. This artist has created this to fill the entire 12 by 12 area, if applicable. But we are obviously not going to be making it that big today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the design, and then I'm going to use these little tiny squares in the corner to resize it. So when I hold my arrows over the top, the cursor changes to 2 little arrows, and then I'm going to just drag it down to fit it on my stencil. And I want my stencil to take up most of the space on this piece, just because there's already going to be a ½ inch border around the edge. So we can go ahead and get fairly close to the edge. We don't want to get so close that our stencil is going to be, you know, very, very thin to the edge. We want to leave a little bit of a border, but I'm going to go ahead and make it about this size. So this size is 5.72 by 3.6, and I think this is going to be a great size for our project. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click it again, and then I'm going to use this tool up here in my top toolbar, which is the center and align tool, and I'm going to center it, and then I'm going to align it also. And this just puts it exactly in the middle of our stencil. So that's not always applicable for the projects that you might be working on, but for our project it is applicable because we want this to line up exactly in the middle of our stencil, because our stencil is going to be our guide to lining this up on our actual piece of art that we're using. At this point, you can see that this design has kind of these fun ombre colors to it. Obviously, it's going to cut just in our stencil material, so we're not going to have this, but I'm going to be following the same kind of pattern for our watercolor today. I'm going to have a very opaque top letter, and then I'm going to kind of water it down as we go, so it will kind of mimic the same design in our project today. So at this point, we have done everything that we need to do to set up our design in Silhouette Studio. So I'm now going to show you how to set up your machine and your mat to start cutting this awesome project. So our media size in Silhouette Studio, we made it 4.5 inches wide and 6.5 inches tall. And the stencil material is it likes to roll. It doesn't stay super flat, and for that reason, I recommend cutting it with a mat instead of cutting it matless. So I'm going to go ahead and load the mat now. To load the mat, we just press this upward arrow, And once it starts blinking, we're going to line this corner of the mat up with these gray arrows and the line right here. And just hold it there. And it will slowly pull the mat in, and that allows you to feed the mat with both hands so that it will get a nice even feed, and it will pull it backwards and forwards evenly the entire time that it's cutting. Now that we're back in Silhouette Studio, we're going to go ahead and go to the Send panel. And that is this button up here in the upper right hand corner. So let's click Send. And you can see that it will zoom in, and we can see this dark red line around all of our pieces. If for some reason that red line wasn't showing up and your design looked like this, it's just set to no cut. So what you need to do is you just need to click your design and then select cut right here, and it will move to cut. Now we're just going to select the material that we're using. So last time I was cutting on this machine, I was using matte vinyl, so that's what it's set to, but we need to change this to stencil material. So I'm going to open this drop-down menu, and then I'm just going to begin typing stencil. And I will select that material. There are literally hundreds of default materials in Silhouette Studio that you can select from that will automatically adjust to whatever material that you're using. So you can see that the default settings for this stencil material, the blade depth is 3, the force is 33, and the speed is 2. And I'm not going to change any of those. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that my machine is connected down here, and it is. It says ready. If for some reason this isn't showing up ready, you can just click this little machine icon down here and connect to the machines that are showing right here. But ours is ready to go. We have our material loaded and our material selected up here. So now I'm just going to come down to the bottom and click send. The machine just finished cutting, so now we just need to make sure that it cut through the material enough. And the way that I do that is I'm just going to take this hook tool that we sell here at Silhouette, and I'm just going to go ahead and weed out one of my letters. And the reason I'm weeding one of my letters is because this is a stencil, right? So normally, if this wasn't a stencil, I would try and take out the O, the middle of the O or something. But we can weed one of the letters, and we see that it cut perfectly. This L came out really, really nicely. So I'm just going to put that to the side. To unload the machine, I'm going to press this little downward arrow right here. And it went and spit it out, and now I'm going to turn the mat over and pull the mat away from the material. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm trying to avoid my stencil bubbling as much as possible. So as you can see, sometimes little bubbles collect, and we're going to try and get as many of those bubbles out as we can. But when you do bend stencil material, those bubbles tend to stay there for longer. So we don't want them, so we are just going to try and keep this as flat as possible while we weed the rest of the design. And like I said, remember that we are making a stencil, so we're going to be weeding in reverse, kind of. Or not reverse, we're going to be weeding the inverse of what we would normally weed. And as you can see, this is a very quick project, honestly. I think it is very impressive too, the final result. So if you need a card for somebody, or even just a cute decoration for your house for Valentine's Day, this is an awesome project. So now I'm going to use some transfer tape to transfer this design to my paper. And another thing I want to mention is I'm using mixed media paper, a heavy weighted mixed media paper. You can try to use watercolor paper, but in my experience, since watercolor paper has a very, very bumpy texture, the stencil did not stick to that as well as it did the mixed media paper. This is a little bit smoother, and it's still plenty thick, as you can see. The water isn't going to bend this or anything, but that is something that I wanted to point out. So to use transfer tape, you're going to peel the white backing off of the clear tape layer. And then when you're putting it on vinyl, I like to start in the middle and push down, and then push upward to avoid any bubbling, and then slowly push downward. And then we're going to take our silhouette scraper tool right here, and we are just going to smooth everything out. And that was a pretty easy transfer, a nice even transfer. Our stencil really didn't bubble at all. Another tip with this project that I found is smaller tends to be easier. When you're using a big stencil, it can be harder to not have it bubble. You can do it, and I did do it last night when I was practicing for this tutorial, but it is easier if you just do it at a smaller scale. So if you're just starting out, I would recommend that. And 5x7 is a great size to start with because that is a standard card size also. So you can always send this to somebody or put it in a frame or something like that. So now what we're going to do is we are just going to separate the backing from the front stencil and then slowly pull our white paper back. Now we're going to put this onto our paper. So I'm just going to pick it up very, very lightly and then kind of center it. Like I said, we kind of put a 1/2 inch border on all edges, but our stencil size wasn't exactly perfect. But just try your best to kind of line it up and leave around a 1/2 inch around your top and your side that you start with. And then, since this is a stencil, we don't want this to bubble. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the top down and then stick it really, really nicely. And then we're going to slowly work our way down with our scraper tool. And if you don't have a scraper tool, you can use a credit card also, or your ID or something like that. Just anything that has a nice hard edge. And you can see that even the transfer tape doesn't stick super bad to the paper. It's a really nice surface that is actually pretty forgiving, it seems like. And now we're going to get into my favorite part of this project, which is the watercolor. So to use our watercolors today, I'm going to be using a paint tray, and then I'm also using tubed watercolors. So this is a metallic pink that I'm going to be using today, and this is a set that I bought from Michael's. It was $16 for over 32 colors, so I got a lot of colors in this set also. So the way that I'm going to use this is I'm just going to squeeze out a tiny, tiny bit into my paint tray. And that's really all you need. I probably don't really even need that much, but I want to make sure I have enough to complete the whole project. And then I also have a watercolor brush right here. If you don't have specific watercolor brushes, you're probably good to just use a regular paintbrush as well, but you can see that watercolor brushes just are a little bit more softer than classic paintbrushes, and they also come to a tip. For this specific project, that's not super important, but it is helpful just to know the difference for if you're doing a different design that's going to require some shading or things like that. So now what we need to do is we have a little bowl of water right here, and we have some paper towels. And like I said, I'm going to do this design as a super opaque top layer, and then it's slowly going to get lighter and lighter, kind of in an ombre fashion. And so I'm just going to keep adding water to my paint, and that's how it's going to get lighter and lighter. With classic paints, if you want to get a lighter shade, you add white. But with watercolors, if you want to get a lighter shade, you just keep adding more water. So what we're going to do is we're just going to have our little water bowl right here, and then I'm just going to begin by dripping a few drops in. And like I said, this first layer is supposed to be fairly opaque, so don't add a ton of water, maybe just like 5 drops of water. And then we're just going to mix it a tiny bit. And you can already see it's taking on more of a watercolor consistency. This one specifically is a metallic watercolor, and I think it's so beautiful for the final product. So I'm excited for you guys to see it. So I'm just going to get some good paint on the end of my brush, and we want it to be fairly opaque, as you can see, because this is going to be our top layer. So I'm just going to go ahead and start painting now. And there are a whole bunch of different ways that you can watercolor. I tested out a lot of different ways for the specific project when I was practicing, and this is just what I found because I felt like this method was easiest for beginners. But you can also paint the letters with just water first, have 2 bowls of water, and then you can dab your colors and you can kind of mix your colors and kind of get that like beautiful blended look. And that was really, really beautiful. But since this is a beginner project, I just wanted to keep this as simple as possible today. And one thing with watercolors is they do blend. So if you're using more than one color and it's not completely dry when you touch it, it is going to blend. So just keep that in mind if you're layering colors. Sometimes we want that blended look and sometimes we don't. So just keep that in mind. I think this is a super cool, fun project because I don't know if you've ever tried it, but watercoloring letters is incredibly difficult to get crisp edges. And you're going to see when we pull this stencil off, our edges are so crisp and so beautiful. And I think it's actually a super fun way to add details to like a portrait. Right now I'm working on painting some portraits of some people with watercolors. Just preliminarily, I'm not a professional watercolor by any means, but it's just for fun. But I think it would be really, really cool to use this method to add their name along the bottom of the portraits, which would be so hard to do freehand with your paints, but it would be a lot easier to do if you had a little stencil. All right, I'm pretty happy with this top one. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some water to do the next line. I just added 3 drops and now I'm going to mix this again. I'm going to add 2 more drops. And then I'm also just going to clean out my brush a little bit since I don't want it to be as opaque. And you can already see the consistency of the paint has changed a lot. It's a lot more watery. So you can see that it is lighter than the first shade. And another thing when I'm doing my lighter shades is I just don't dip my brush as often for the color. And if you do feel like, I do feel like this one got a little bit darker than I wanted it to, I'm just going to take my brush and clean it out. And then I'm going to take some water and I'm just going to use that water to lift a little bit of the color out. And it got lighter. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our next one. We're just going to add a little bit more water, just smoothing this out. Although I will say one of the best things about watercolor, in my opinion, is the texture that you can get. Not everything has to be super smooth and easy to see. Not everything has to be super, super smooth. And I'm adding quite a bit of water this time, because I really do want my last one, my final one, to be quite transparent. And as you add more water, kind of try and have a little bit of a lighter hand, just so that since it is more water, it is going to take longer to dry. And this is even pretty light even compared to my one above it, so I'm going to add. I'm actually going to take my paper towel and just dab it a little bit. And then I'm just going to take some of my paint and move it over in my palette just a tiny bit and add some water to that. There we go. That's kind of more of what I'm going for. And it's just kind of, you know, guessing. You can always layer once it's dried too, if you would like to. But I really like how this is looking so far. I think this is going to look really, really great in the end. So I left and rinsed out my water container and my paint palette, and I've really only been letting this dry for, I don't know, a couple minutes, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and it's totally dry now, mostly due to the fact that it's not a ton of layers, and I did try and keep my hand really, really light when I was painting. And we're just going to peel it back slowly. I mean, you can already see the super crisp lines. Alright, so there is most of it gone. Now we're just going to take our hook tool again. Going to grab this little tiny piece. And now I'm going to grab the inside of the O's. Awesome! And there is our finished product. I think it turned out so cute. So thanks so much for joining me. I hope you have fun making these Valentine watercolors for your loved ones.